Chapter 6: Our Russophile Past. If one looks back into the history of the Rusin cultural movement, its Russophile orientation is undeniable. This is an odd contrast compared to the rest of the East Slavic realm at the time of the early 1900s. While Belarusians and Ukrainians were starting to come into their own, the furthest group away from the Russian Empire was creeping ever closer to it. Its influence touches every part of the story. The great Alexander Duknovich had even created his own Russian-Rusin hybrid script to write his works in, using it in the famous I Was, Am, and Will Remain Rusin, published in 1851. The most famous Rusin martyr ever, Maxim Sandovich, was also a hardcore Russophile at heart. These are just two examples of many influential Rusins who had a deep-seated love for the Russian state. Instead of taking inspiration from Ukrainophiles, intellectuals saw Russia as the one to be placed up on the pedestal. Some may look back at this with contempt. However, this was the best of the worst choices that Rusins had. The fact that Rusins had been Russophile-orientated is one of the primary reasons that our identity even exists today. With such a weak national spirit for the time, as well as factors surrounding the area, it was essential to pick a side. Had we not done so, local and regional identities would have been too weak to withstand national movements. Historically, the modern Russophile movement began after the 1848 revolution in Hungary. These villagers had witnessed the Russian army march through the Carpathians on their way to Budapest to crush the rebellion of the Hungarians. The enormous importance to this event cannot be understated. Along with the Spring of Nations occurring the same year, and the atmosphere produced by it, these two events are the starting point of the modern Rusin identity. Whatever one's views on this topic are, there is no healthy way to deny Russophilia as a pillar of early Rusin development. Had we not chosen the Russophile direction, the last century might have turned out rather badly for Rusins. We must look at the surrounding political atmosphere of the era to fully understand what I mean. Following 1884, you see increased Hungarian, Slovak, and Ukrainian nationalism, all in a way seeking cultural and sometimes political autonomy from their imperial rulers. This only became a real and serious threat against Rusins following the 1867 formation of Austria-Hungary, though the building blocks had begun 20 years earlier. Because of the weakness of Rusin identity, all three of these movements were in a fantastic position to attempt to assimilate communities in Carpathian Rus. In some cases, these movements even had substantial success. The amount of former Rusin villages in eastern Slovakia that have been assimilating is a staggering amount. Same with the communities in northeastern Hungary. In the modern day, there are very few left. The most important thread in this, however, is the counterbalance of the Galician Ukrainian movement. During the late 1800s and in the beginning of the 20th century, the Russophile movement in eastern Galicia had been all but forgotten in comparison to the Austrian-backed pro-Ukrainian faction. The times of the Russophile movement in the 1850s and 60s of Adolf Dobryansky and the Ruthenian Council was all but gone. This provided an issue for both the Russians and Rusins. For the Russian higher classes, many had seen the writing on the wall. Whether these people in Ruthenia were to be called Little Russians or Ukrainians, it had become clear that this group was different from those in the Muscovite homeland. This provided a geopolitical issue that persists to a lesser extent into the present day. Though Stalin's industrialization of the Urals, and other such places such as the Volga in the following decades made land and food production from Ukraine less important, this did not completely eliminate the problem. The possibility of a pro-Western nation bordering Russia to the southwest, combined with the loss of a perceived part of their ethnic homeland, remains all too close for comfort. As for Rusins, the winning out of the pro-Ukrainian identity is a grave challenge. From almost day one, this Ukraine movement claims all of Carpathian Rus as part of its nation. Along with this, it wishes to combine all East Slavic-speaking areas of Austria-Hungary into one administrative unit. If such an action as this would have happened, the result most likely would have been considerably worse for a Rusin identity than how things actually turned out. Outnumbered and outclassed in terms of cultural capital and population size, a Rusin awakening would have been incredibly outmatched in such an environment. It is because of the Russophile orientation in Carpathian Rus, not in spite of it, that Rusins maintain their position towards Ukrainization. A purely Rusin orientation is simply not strong enough to combat a Ukrainian one at the time. This also brings in, even if it was minimal, support from the Russian Empire to bankroll cultural development, of which was desperately needed. It is for these two reasons alone that a pro-Russophile orientation was a stronger strategic choice than a simple Rusin one. What we do now, however, is a completely different story. Looking back, we can see how untrustworthy Russia truly is. At every step of the way, we were put on the chopping block. It was under the rule of the USSR, and with that primarily the actions of Russian decision-makers, that led to the worst repression of Rusyns that we have ever seen in our history. We can again see this with the foolish declaration of independence of Transcarpathia from Ukraine in the mid-2000s, a move almost certainly backed by Russian support. The provocative announcement seems little more than a screw you message to Ukraine from Moscow, rather than anything to do with helping Rusyns. The Russians may one day prove to be a useful, yet still untrustworthy ally if geopolitics of the region change. Should the state of Ukraine weaken, or a larger confrontation happen within the far east of the country, we should not be so quick to dismiss a strategic partner. However, should nothing change, our best option is to work out a suitable arrangement with the Ukrainians. In this scenario, independence is a fantasy. Regional autonomy to that of Crimea before annexation is a favorable result. This scenario is both the most peaceful and strategically sound for the long-term future of Carpathian Rus. Having an entire nation pitted against you is never an optimal thing. Should the US pull completely back from Europe, or more importantly the EU collapses or shrinks, all bets are off. Though the European Union and US stoke the flames of ultranationalism in Ukraine, it also keeps these forces in check to some extent. If we do see a Western retreat from Eastern Europe, then we can be sure of two things. The first is an incredible increase of Russian influence into many of the former Eastern Bloc countries, and the second is the escalation of Ukrainian nationalism following tensions with Russia. Under these conditions, increased mistreatment of Rusyns is a likely outcome. In this instance, we may need to seek a different path. However, this outcome within the next decade is unlikely. One can also not forget the benefit of being separated from Russia by a country such as Ukraine as well. Such a buffer provides a barrier from Russian influence, which in an era where Rusyns are trying to fully coalesce their identity and history is a good thing. For now, trying to reason with an increasingly nationalist government in Kiev is the soundest idea.